Business AM. Think forward.
A warm welcome here with us at Business AM Radio. I'm Lennart Creël and next to me is my colleague Dennis Janssen. The following hour consists of our dedicated talk with Mr. Denys Kudin, Deputy Minister of Economy of Ukraine. We're about to discuss the different levels of the economic situation in your war-torn country. We would like to focus on entrepreneurship, the state of commercial affairs and trade within Ukraine. We will also discuss the Ukrainian war economy, what it is, and how do Ukrainian business people adapt to these dire times. All this and much more in the coming hour. First question, Mr. Kudin. What is the current situation of the economy for small and medium enterprises? Has the life of business people, factory personnel, and office people changed completely in Ukraine?
Well, indeed, unprovoked Russian war against Ukraine has affected the life across all the country and has affected lives of millions of Ukrainians. And unfortunately, all our efforts now are fully concentrated on restoring peace on our land and fighting the enemy back. If we look at the economic situation, it varies a lot across the regions. So when we hear the wartime economy, we imagine that the whole country is covered with fire and the situation is more or less the same in all the country. However, that's not true. When Russia attacked Ukraine in February 2022, indeed, Russian troops came as close as 20 kilometers from the center of Kyiv, the capital. But then the heroic efforts of Ukrainian army permitted us to throw them back. And now the war is localized along the eastern border. So basically, we talk of four large regions, namely Lugansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, and of course Crimea, which is occupied by Russia unlawfully since 2014. And when we look at Ukrainian territories, we define three economic zones. The first economic zone is the actual battlefield. You can imagine the real war of a scale comparable to World War II, with artillery working, with direct gunfights. And of course, in these areas, the economic activity is almost stopped. So it all happens around servicing military men. Then the second area is the area adjoined to the area of actual battlefield. I would say that is about 100 kilometers from the front line. There is a lot of economic activities there. Many Ukrainians decided to stay in their homes and not leave, but also substantial amount of population have relocated to the west of Ukraine, to those territories that are relatively safe. So there you can see shops operating, people live life that is threatened by Russia, but they also help the front line a lot. They do repairs of the military equipment, they do procurement, supply. A lot of medical services are offered in that regard. And I would say that the life of people in the rural areas is less affected, even 100 kilometers from the actual battlefield. However, there is very high risk of missile shooting and, let's say, a rocket that could land there, because artillery has a certain distance it can work. So occasionally there are explosions there. And now the most part of Ukraine, I would say about 60% of our actual territory, is not directly involved in the battle fight. I'm saying not directly because indirectly every Ukrainian family is part of the war, because every Ukrainian family has sent either a father, a mother, a brother, a sister, a son, or a daughter to the front line. And people from across the country, from west to center to east, are now doing the counter-strike and fighting back the aggressor. Mm. But I would say that on these territories of west of Ukraine and center, the life has much returned to the pace it was in January 2022. So what does it mean? When we look in the window and we see that streets are flooded with people and cars, shops operate, markets operate, people have enough food, the logistics companies operate as well, and the economy is revitalizing.
That's something maybe I would like to get to at this moment, because we are really interested, of course, in the details, because in Western media, we often hear, obviously, about the defense, the strategy, the weapons that can be used. But obviously, there's an impact on the whole economy. Is there any numbers you can give us about how the Ukrainian national economy has been impacted by the war?
Yes, our GDP has decreased by 30% year to year. And that's a big economic shock. However, our first estimation when Russia invaded Ukraine was much deeper decrease of GDP. We projected it to be between 35 and 40%, even 45. But in reality, numbers look much better than we projected in the beginning. When we look at different industries, the drop down is different across the industries. The biggest loss has occurred in metallurgy sector and ore mining, merely because of the lack of electricity supply and the blockade of seaports, because we have exported those commodities mostly by sea. Now, due to international efforts, there is a grain initiative where Ukraine is still able to export grain to feed the world, as Ukraine is one of the world top producers of wheat and corn, but not metals. And obviously it affected the industry. So the drop down is minus 70%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is there a scarcity of certain goods? And how does a lack of these goods affect normal business production and trade in Ukraine? And how should these goods reach Ukraine? By train? By air? By truck?
Let's differentiate several spheres. When we talk of the population, the key security areas are food security, energy security, and fuel security. So in terms of food security, Ukraine has been netto exporter of food. So under all the circumstances, we will have enough food to feed our population. However, there is a risk for the world security because Ukraine is limited in its ability to export. So here we do not see any special obstacles. In what regards fuel security, diesel, petrol, here we are well balanced because our private sector was able to create totally new routes of importing petrol and diesel through the western border from Poland, Hungary, also from Romania. And we are now totally balanced in terms of that. However, the energy sector is much affected by Russia because their military strategy is to destroy our energy generation capacities, energy transmission capacities, and also the transformation points where you change the current AC/DC. So in this regard, unfortunately, population has every day several hours without electricity, and it varies a lot across the regions. For instance, in Odessa, we had almost a regional blackout, while in Kiev, we were able to maintain just few hours out of electricity. And it affects the life of people. For companies, our economy pre-war was 20% dependent on imports. So import was 20% of the final consumption in B2B. And of course, we experienced severe challenges in importing these goods in Ukraine. And it was connected with two decisions. First, the decision of the National Bank of Ukraine to keep currency reserves. Mm-hmm. So we have imposed restrictions on payments abroad. Mm-hmm. Those restrictions were temporary, and now they are all lifted. So now you can buy goods almost freely from abroad. Mm-hmm. It helped a lot to stabilize the national currency.
Okay.
Because our government has paid a lot of attention to keep the macroeconomic stability, meaning the inflation rate. Central bank established fixed exchange rate, which gave a lot of predictability to businesses.
Mm-hmm. We are leaving this chat for a little while. We'll be back shortly with Mr. Denys Kudin, Deputy Minister of Economy of Ukraine.
Business AM. Think forward.
We're back with Mr. Denys Kudin, Deputy Minister of the Economy of Ukraine, and we're continuing our discussion of the economical situation in Ukraine currently, now that the war has been going on for a year now. We've reached out of this topic a little bit already. The western part of Ukraine, cities around Lviv, for example, are much quieter than on the eastern side of the country. How does that affect businesses in Ukraine and the operation of the economy in your country right now?
Now we have to say that almost 90% of businesses have renewed their full operations. And it's interesting that the market economy really creates the competition, and we can see companies that were forced to go out of the market because of the war, because of the insecurity of supply chain, instability of customer inflows. At the same time, other companies that were stronger were able to recap their market share and even expand their operations. So now 17% of Ukrainian companies report that they have doubled or even tripled sales in absolute numbers as related to the pre-war period. Another 40% of companies have slightly increased their sales, but again, higher than the inflation rate. Mm-hmm. And that represents nearly half of the companies, which is a good sign. So it means that the economy is reviving, that people are bringing back to normal life, and they have accommodated themselves to the challenges that we have now. But indeed, I have to say that the west of Ukraine is a relatively safe area, and we invite our foreign partners and businesses to look at investment opportunities now. Because as they say, the most risky decision is not to invest in Ukraine right now. Mm-hmm. We have signed our application to become a full EU member state. This is the political agenda of Ukraine's government and president to become full-fledged member of the European family. Of course, first we need to win this war with the help of Europe and the world. And then as part of the European family, we'll have full access to all what the EU has to offer. Mm-hmm. So the nearshoring concept, as they say now in the European Commission, the family shoring concept is something attractive for investments as well.
At this moment, would you say there is a bigger need of goods and services in the countryside than in the city? What is lacking on the countryside? Or would you think there is more suffering in the Ukrainian cities?
I would say that cities suffer more than the countryside, almost because cities are condensed. And in Ukraine, we have many large cities with several hundred millions of inhabitants and over a million. In Kyiv, we have about 3 million people now. So here, the energy infrastructure is the weak point because Russia attacks it almost every week. Our system is resilient, but its strength was limited. So now there is a huge demand in immediate repairs of our energy networks. Mm-hmm. And power generators. Now, many companies have procured autonomous energy generators and keep running even in the absence of electricity.
Okay, and there's obviously a side of the economy that's about services as well. How has that been impacted by the war now?
The biggest challenge in the service industry is the outflow of people. Several millions of Ukrainians had to relocate to Western Europe to save their families from the cruelties of war. Now, the good news is that more Ukrainians are coming back home than are leaving Ukraine, but this is still not enough. So obviously, industries, the services sector is affected, but it is renewing its operations as well. So I should say that all the people, the technical engineers who are involved in technical repairs are now very much in demand. They work day and night, and sometimes even for so many prolonged hours.
Mm-hmm.
But the industry is back. Maybe now the most affected industry is the financial industry because of the limitations of payments abroad. Our central bank had to reduce the possibilities for capital outflows. So that imposes restrictions on the sector as a whole.
Ukraine is experiencing a war economy. How would you explain this kind of economy to Western listeners and to business people in Belgium?
I would define a war economy as the special period where all the companies, either private or public, must think what can they produce for the army or for helping army to do their job. From day one of the war, it took us about 2 weeks to involve several tens of thousands of companies across Ukraine to deliver goods and services to the Ukrainian army. And in 3 weeks, we have accomplished the procedure of compiling them together, gathering the needs, and helping them get orders from the army. Of course, the national economy was not suited well to cover all the needs the army had. So we had to import a lot. But now we can see that more and more local products are used by the army. And that's also good for the economy because it starts reviving, and these are jobs for the people who are in Ukraine. Now, second part, of course, is the military-industrial complex. Before the war, Ukraine inherited the military-industrial complex of the Soviet Union, but also had some new developments. Now we can see a lot of military tech startups, especially in the sphere of drones that emerge, create the technological solutions that can advance us on the battlefield and create the competitive advantage. And that's a totally new cluster. And I believe that in several months, we will be the leading R&D space for military tech in the world, because the feedback loop between companies and the actual front line is very narrow. So companies and startups get immediate feedback on the tools that they create. And finally, the third part, the rest of economy, civil economy. They had to accommodate to the wartime by two means. First is relocation. Our government has launched a massive program of relocating companies to the west of Ukraine. Until now, we have relocated about 800 companies, and that's very much compared to the job Soviet Union did in 1941. By December 1941, 6 months after the invasion, they have relocated 2,500 companies. And we did 1/3 of them with a much smaller economy. So, and that counts only companies that were transported and relocated by the help of government. Another several hundreds, even maybe thousands of companies have relocated by their own. And of course, every company has to change logistics, supply chains, and to rethink its marketing because demands have changed, people flow have changed, but many companies did it well.
Okay, well, I hear in your explanation a lot about the wartime economy and new business opportunities there are and being taken by startups, for example. And we also briefly touched about the international situation, the EU memberships your country is seeking. Ever since the start of the war, Western countries have imposed sanctions on Russia, who is also in a wartime economy, obviously. But these haven't really worked out. The Russian economy is still growing. What does the Western world, the Western bloc, need to do? And where have they failed?
Ukraine insists on enlarging sanctions. We have a Yermak-Makfol working group that creates ideas and specific terms of sanctions to be imposed. And I think Ukraine is now leading this process. Obviously, Russia has to be economically punished for this aggression so that their government has no means to support the war, because war is a very expensive enterprise. And unfortunately, the sanctions against Russian oil and gas came later than we expected, but we are very grateful to our partners for creating this sanctions frontline. We believe that sanctions should be widened and Russia should be blocked from supplying their goods and services to the civilized world.
We're pausing this conversation for just a short while. We'll be back shortly with Mr. Denys Kudin, Deputy Minister of Economy of Ukraine.
Business AM. Think forward.
We're back with Mr. Kudin, still Deputy Minister of Economy of Ukraine, but not for much longer. We'll reveal why at the end of this program. For now, we continue to discuss the ongoing war and the impact on the Ukrainian economy. Hands-on information tells us that receiving a rocket on your factory is a devastating thing to experience. For a business owner, for his staff, and all the people that work for that company. How do business people deal with those atrocities?
Let me share my personal experience. On the first day of war, when I woke up and heard explosions right behind my window at home, and I read in the news that ballistic rockets are shot against Kyiv, I thought that when I open the door and look at the street, I will see the apocalyptic picture that everything will be in fire and maybe my own home would stand on the street, if I was able to go out. But then it appeared that actually, despite all the scary situation and despite all the atrocities of the war, it is not enough for one rocket to destroy the whole large factory. I saw by my eyes the devastating results of a rocket that has shooted in the factory building. And I should say that you have to use several precise rockets to destroy one factory unit, and many more of them to destroy the whole factory. When they use aviation bombs, it's much different because the bomb has a narrow distance, it has a big explosive power. The rocket is much less. And so the bad news is that the military risk is still present. But the good news is that very often when we take western parts of Ukraine and central parts of Ukraine, the risk of a complete destruction of an asset by the rocket attack almost equals to the explosion from the misuse of natural gas or heating. And that's why this risk can be insured. The government of Ukraine now puts all the efforts to get insurance of military risk from the DFC, the American Overseas Investment Corporation, and also MIGA, that's the insurance agency of the World Bank Group. So still in Lviv, Zakarpattia, Ivano-Frankivsk, Chernivtsi, people even now start new businesses and open new factories. Our government has launched grants program to stimulate people create the processing industries and processing plants, because the access to the seaports is blocked. We are not able to export as much raw materials in agriculture as before, so we have to process it inside of the country and export less volume with the higher value added.
There's obviously a few sectors in the economy that have been hit hard in Ukraine. One of them I would like to ask about is the metal sector. What has been the impact on that sector and on the national economy?
Metallurgy is maybe the most affected sector. The drop down of the sector is minus 70%, which is a terrible outcome. It occurs mainly because of two reasons. First is the lack of power supply. They need electricity, obviously. And second is the access to the seaports and access to the railway. In the past, Ukraine was very much tied economically to Russia and Belarus. Even the railway gauge has the Eastern standard. It means that with the Western Europe, which has a narrow gauge, we have to change the platform that carries wagons to transport goods. And of course, we are resolving these bottlenecks, but that's another big potential for the investments. The president of Ukraine has announced that we are building decentralized energy generation system so that we become less dependent on large energy generating facilities. And also, our Ministry of Infrastructure and Development works on resolving logistic bottlenecks in rail transport across the western border, and also international community pressures Russia to deblock the Black Sea so that we can export metals and ore.
Mm-hmm. You also, of course, need energy production for your country and for the industries. How does the war affect the industry and the energy supply to the industry at this moment?
Unfortunately, our total energy consumption has dropped 2 times. So that's a very serious decline of, let's say, 50%. That can be explained by 2 factors. First is the reduction in population numbers, so that there was an outflow of people abroad, unfortunately. And second is the decreased consumption by the metallurgy sector. Before the war, they consumed 55% of all B2B consumption of electricity. Now, what we do, we support introducing new small energy generating facilities from natural gas, also renewable energy. We stimulate households to install solar panels, wind propellers and turbines, also small hydro generation. And that's a big area for our development in the future. Obviously, we will have to rethink the whole design of our energy infrastructure.
But also on the short term, there's obviously the problem of energy right now. Is there any difference in how you handle this in, say, for example, the western part of the country to the eastern part, which is closer to the front line right now? For example, can western cities and production facilities provide more for the more war-torn part of your country right now? And is there a difference between those regions?
No, I would say that there is no difference, unfortunately. The problem is that Russia attacks the transmission points. So Ukraine has a united energy system so that the single operator, Ukreenergo, manages the inflow and outflow all around Ukraine. Russia attacks energy generating facilities also in the west of Ukraine. So there is no difference. And it all depends on so-called energy islands. when there is a generation capacity, there are consumers, and there are no transmission points to other parts of the system. Now, we enjoy a lot of support from the European Union, and we are grateful to our European partners for sending us large generators. The American party has sent us special gas turbines that can be installed in a very fast term. And this kind of technical assistance is of high value because we are able to restore several hundreds of megawatts of electricity generation immediately. And we still continue to ask our foreign partners for this technical assistance and the equipment to install it immediately. So that's the short-term strategy that we have. Another strategy is also a joint program with the European Commission. The European Commission has gifted Ukraine 35 million bulbs, LED bulbs, because we still our households still use the incandescent lamps that have very high energy consumption. Let's say one bulb would consume as much as 60 watts per hour, and the LED lamp would consume 8 times less. So we are now exchanging bulbs through post offices. We started program just 10 days ago, but we exchanged already 3 million bulbs, and we plan to exchange from 35 to 50 million by end of spring. That also reduces the consumption, and it helps us to provide more electricity to companies.
We're about to have a very brief intermission. We'll be back in a whiff. Only to conclude with the last part of this program.
Business AM. Think forward.
Mr. Denys Kudin, Deputy Minister of the Economy of Ukraine. I want to start a bit with the national economy right now. There's some impressive numbers about the GDP of Ukraine trying to keep a steady course as much as possible, obviously. How is this possible on a national level to keep up with a lot of things in the economy while the country is being torn apart by war?
Ukraine's economy, Ukraine's GDP, was $200 billion in 2021. That's the last year before the war, and it was the best economic record that we had. Basically the highest dollar-denominated GDP in our new economic history. Now, because of war, it has decreased to 154 billion US dollars. And that's exactly 1 year throwback in terms of dollar-denominated GDP. So that's bad outcome. But even in 2023, we believe in economic growth. At this point, we believe that the growth will be very small. We expect the growth of 3% of GDP, which means that we will be still below the level of 2021. But the mere fact of growth under the wartime is very important. How is that possible? First of all, it's the resilience of Ukrainian companies. Obviously, Ukraine was on the track of market economic reforms since collapse of the Soviet Union. We have not implemented all of them, but a lot was done. So we already have an economy that has several hundred thousands of companies of small scale, mostly enrolled in services, small production, and very much export oriented. So these companies were able to rethink their strategy. They were fast. They tried to renew their business activities already 3 weeks after the first day of invasion, which on my personal belief is a remarkable speed, because in its entirety, Ukrainians are very entrepreneurial people and want to live in a good, prosperous country. So this agility was a big important factor. Mm-hmm. Another factor is that we learned from COVID experience. COVID in 2020 taught us how to work remotely. Can you imagine that even the Ministry of Economy was able to produce the first model of the war impact on the national economy by the end of the day on February 24, the first day of invasion. How was that possible? Because all our workers had online access to our econometric models. They worked in cloud. They worked remotely from their homes. That's something unthinkable even 3 years ago. And third factor was the experience from 2014. So the war of Russia against Ukraine started not on February 24, but in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and started fighting in Gast and Lugansk. So from that time, all the national companies have learned how to deal with such a crisis. So many of them were able to get back in their memories what they did then and learn maybe from some mistakes and to be quite well prepared for such circumstances now.
Mm-hmm. With regard to the future, is there an economic future without the help of former brother Russia? I mean, the economic axis will shift drastically after the war, but let's take into account that Ukraine will win this war. Is there a sufficient economic understanding between Europe and Ukraine?
I would say it is something surreal to hear from Russia when they call us neighbors, when they call us friends and brothers, because obviously you would not go at war against your brother. So unfortunately, there is no brotherhood. From Ukrainian side, we never had cruelty or hostility. We always wanted to cooperate and to trade, to work shoulder to shoulder. We are sad that Russia has chosen a hostile military way. Obviously, there is no ability for us to cooperate in the future. Now, the entire border of Russia and Ukraine is covered with blood of Ukrainians. So I cannot imagine any chance in the future to trade and cooperate. It means that all our focus will be concentrated on the European Union, our closest and biggest market. We have achieved at the political level the full access of Ukrainian companies to the EU market already from June 2022. It was a very powerful signal for our companies that they can think West, they can export West, they can develop West. So we believe in this theory that the most frequent economic interactions happen within 300-kilometer distance from the national border. So when we take the west border of Ukraine, we have Poland from one side, then Hungary, Slovakia, Romania. These are countries that are the most proximate to us. And I believe in the development of this 300-kilometer area across the border, emerging of new production facilities, processing plants, also services businesses from both sides. And here in the Ministry of Economy, we believe that this cross-border close cooperation is the key to our future economic success. There is the concept of nearshoring, when the larger economy would outplace its production facilities to a neighboring country with lower cost structure. Ukraine can provide that lower cost structure and give the option to enjoy the full access to the EU market to early investors.
There's also at this point in the global economy a lot of help, both military and financial help for Ukraine. For example, the International Monetary Fund has given out a loan to Ukraine. What more can be done by countries and the international community to boost the economy for the next coming years?
That's a good question. In reality, Ukraine is now fully dependent on the economic and financial aid that we get from our partners. That's a crucial element of our public finances. And we are very thankful for our partners for this support. Obviously, International Monetary Fund is a crucial element of the entire international financial system. So we are in close cooperation with them. We have constant missions, monitoring, and we very much hope to have a joint program with the IMF soon. And also, we enjoy direct financial support from the European Union, from the Great Britain, from the United States, other countries of G7, and that's very valuable. The next step, on our opinion, and this is something that we ask for, is to provide government guarantees of the European member states for the European companies to invest in Ukraine. So the governments of our neighboring countries could take partially the military risk and country risk on their own and provide possibility for their domestic companies to expand to Ukraine. By doing so, we will have a win-win situation when European economies grow, but also the Ukrainian economy is growing. And this is a big opportunity and a big challenge to be pursued. So
maybe after the war, Ukraine could become a leaping country. I will clarify my question. From a country rooted in old economical Russian doctrine, Ukraine could become a full-blown, hyper-digitalized European trade partner. In other words, Ukraine could become an example of a modern-day European economic force.
Definitely, yes. Ukraine must do its triple economic jump. When we say triple economic jump, we mean to do the jump from $4,000 GDP per capita to $12,000 of GDP per capita. And this is exactly the transition from the frontier economy to the developing market economy. So that's our economic strategy, and this is our dream.
Thank you, Mr. Denys Kudin, Deputy Minister of Economy of Ukraine. But not for much longer. From next week on, you are appointed to become the top manager of the state oil company Ukernafta, where you will focus on the fuel front. Good luck, and our heart is with Ukraine.
Business AM. Think forward.